Welcome to Africa's Vision Network. My name is Omar Ashaka. The title of our program is called Two Numbers, FBI and Prison. Two numbers you don't want to play. Our special guest is Mr. Elijah Benjamin Lennox. I'm going to start out by reading a proverb. It's Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. The title of the program, Two Numbers, FBI and Prison, You Don't Want to Play, has a strong relationship with being wise and being foolish. There are reports that African American men in prison is roughly almost 500,000. We know too that many of the men who go to prison aren't necessarily guilty. Have you ever wondered about the roadmap that leads a young African American man to prison? Do you wonder what's in that roadmap that caused them to get a tour of 1 to 5 years or more in prison? What I hope to discuss tonight with Mr. Lennox is to get a perspective from a young African American male. What are his thoughts when he read about African American men going to prison? I want to thank you and welcome you, Elijah, because quite frankly, you were kind of a unexpected guest. But we know God doesn't make any mistakes, and we know that you're here for a reason. Tell us a little bit about Elijah. Where are you from? How old are you?
All right. Well, I am Elijah Benjamin Lennox. I'm from DC native. Nowhere but DC. I've been around here for 24 years, and my time living here on this planet has been quite the experience. Like, I write a lot, and I would say I read a lot as well, but growing up, I've been told, to read, and sometimes I don't really like being told what to do, but when I think about what needs to happen, like, reading is fundamental, and when I read on my own terms, I do feel the benefits mentally. And I used to skateboard a lot, and I'm really into music.
Okay.
I'm playing acoustic guitar on my own, just trying to learn on my own, and that's been on and off for about 5 years.
Okay.
And yeah.
Well, Elijah, you said quite a bit there. I do want to go back before I start asking you about black men in prison, young black men or men in prison. You said you're 24 years old. You also said this has been quite an experience within those 24 years. Can you elaborate on that? What did you really mean to say it's been quite an experience within that 24-year period?
Quite an experience, meaning that life is filled with unexpectations, and I've experienced that on an empirical level. I've been exposed to someone telling me one thing, and then next thing I know, something else occurs. I've been lied to over the course of my living, and the environments that I've been around played an impact on like my upbringing. And
Okay. Well, once again, that's quite a bit, and I'm gonna get to the men, African American men in prison, but you keep bringing up these words that really grab my attention. Now, you said you've been lied to, and I don't need to know who lied to you, but
right.
Are you saying that this false information has has hurt you, has changed your view on the world? Or, I mean, we all have been lied to at some point of our life, but it sounds like this is something that was pretty dramatic for you, and maybe even traumatic.
Yeah, in a way, like it affects me because I have, expectations when someone, presents their word, when they say they will do this. I keep talking about this, and it's just because I've spoken about this before to somebody, like just off the cameras and stuff, but it just goes back to when I was like a little boy, a little child, Christmas time, write your Christmas list, and whatever you put down on here, I'll provide for you. And it wasn't anyone like in the family that I'm talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
It was someone that I think one of my family members knew. And she told me, write, anything down on this list and I'll get it. And I was like, I don't really want much. I just want like some video games, I'm a little boy. So she said, go ahead, feel free. And I wrote down in detail like the games, like their names, and it didn't even fill up the whole page. And she told me she'll, bring it back to me like around Christmas time or somewhere, along those lines, and like I'll have what I wished for. And she told me, she looked me in the eyes, and it affected me in a way because I exerted effort, I put forth my time and my energy to get back some results.
Okay, and I'm not going to take that too much further, but I want to make
Right.
sure I understand what you're saying. Are you saying then you put together this list, someone promised to provide, and in the end they did not? Is that pretty much?
I was quite innocent around this time. This is me, experiencing someone's quote unquote honesty, to my face, and I take it seriously because I didn't have to listen. I didn't have to, put forth the time to, hear what she had to say, but she was talking about something that would like, satisfy a pleasure of mine, just me like comfortably sitting playing a video game that I wished for.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Let me ask you about one other point you made, and then we're going to talk about black men in prison.
Okay.
You talked about your environment,
Oh,
how that has impacted your life and within that 24-year period. Tell our audience in what way did your environment shape who Elijah is today?
How did my environment shape me? Definitely a number of ways, but with the constant changes occurring, I know change is inevitable. So my views on life have been fluctuating between whether I should do, dang, if I lay it straightforward like that, it's pretty, like just the goodness, there's good and bad, there's two forces. And I've been exposed to like both sides and probably some sides in the middle. And I've learned about some things like in like mainstream like music, like frequency levels and how, masses are impacted by what they hear, listen to, and music is definitely an influencer upon society and whoever is like exposed to it. And that's part of my environment because I enjoy music thoroughly, and it's a tool for expression,
Okay.
So
Well, you mentioned you've been exposed to some good things, some bad things. Elijah, how do you think that, well, first of all, what are your thoughts about young African American men so frequently going to prison? Thank God not all, but there's a large number according to statistics.
it saddens me. It really does. And I can relate this back to the environment because there's projects, the projects or like a hood.
And I'm sorry, yeah, I want you to give a definition because there might be some people in the audience that can't even relate to the term projects.
Mm.
They might be thinking a working
Like-
project.
like construction
share us,
sites?
yeah. So share with us something, make it a little clear.
Should I say like something like it's like Section 8 or something?
Okay, well,
Yeah.
whatever way you can define it.
Somewhere where people are struggling, somewhere people on welfare, somewhere where people have food stamps, somewhere where people are, they're struggling to make a living, they're struggling to continue to survive, to live out here, to feed themselves and their kids, and to stay out of trouble, and just to stay alive and well, basically. I've been around these environments, and I've been around some more like affluent areas, up in like Bethesda and such, but it's a vast difference between those two areas. And when I go back to the environment, and when I say, okay, so when you talk about African Americans going to jail and all that, I'll say the environment plays a part in that.
Okay.
So
Well, let me go back to the title, Two Numbers, the FBI in Prison, You Don't Want to Play. And let me share with you a few reasons why I think we don't want to play those numbers. In order to play it, you got to be incarcerated. Some statistics say that 1 in 9 black children have a parent behind bars. Now, with that alone, Elijah, as a young black male, share with me, what's your mental reaction when you hear me read, 1 in 9 black children has had a parent behind bars? What kind of mental reaction, what kind of mental action do you get in your mind just hearing that? I'm just curious.
a few things, and I even get like a visual scenario. First thing I think about is Target, straight up.
You are a target?
I could be,
Okay.
and then the next thing I think about, I want to relate this to when, I don't know if everyone can relate to this, but in school, you're getting picked for either dodgeball or football, people were picking teams, and it's like you said, 1 in 9, like, parents, well, yeah,
Behind
1 in 9,
bars.
yeah, so you say that, and I'm thinking about the first, like, few numbers of, like, kids that get picked for the team, so at that moment when the person choosing who they want on their team, they can choose anyone that they see in front of them right now, so it's a possibility, that can be chosen. So
Well, let me piggyback on that by saying it's also been stated that imprisonment makes the disadvantage literally invisible. And I'll repeat that. Imprisonment, and in this case we're talking about African Americans, specifically men, although we know that the population of women being incarcerated is on the rise as well. Excuse me, but it says, imprisonment makes the disadvantage literally invisible. Now, another translation I have is, it's like you don't count, you don't matter. It's almost like you're non-existent. But what's your, I want to get your young mind percolating, if you will, and give me your perspective on even something like that. Do you feel invisible sometimes?
like, honestly speaking, in my mental state and my physical state, if I'm saying my physical state, I'm here, I'm present in reality right now. I cannot take myself out of reality. I'm here, I've been put into this existence. I cannot say that I do not exist. I cannot say that I am invisible, not even as like a figure of speech. I'm here in this moment. Like, when it crosses my mind, when it goes into my head that I could be portrayed as someone that is like non-existent or invisible, it just like baffles me.
Doesn't register?
It kind of like tampers, my mental state and like what I like believe, as the person I am, and it's really not natural,
Yeah, it's not natural, but we know it does exist. Look, let's talk about our church, Bethesda Baptist Church, in Ivy City, Washington, D.C. Gentrification is huge, but there's a park by the church where there are homeless people, and perhaps some that may be on drugs. I notice how some of the new people in the neighborhood can walk by them like they are invisible. Again, as a young African American male, that's why I was curious. Maybe I'll put the question to you this way. Does racism ever make you feel invisible?
Does racism make me feel invisible?
Give you an example. If you're applying for a job, if you go into a restaurant, and specifically for you, Elijah, and the reason I say this, because your whole style is very different. I think I shared with you about a week or so ago, I can tell you step to a different drum beat. So your presentation, your style of dress, has that created any invisible moments for you in certain environments, whether it's in the mall?
Well, I don't think I've been invisible as of recently. I've been quite noticed, and I'm really taking time to process all that you said and process my response right now. So at the mall, that's where people go to meet up, go to gather around, go to window shop, sometimes go to pick out a couple things. And when I think about being at the mall, I think some people would want to be noticed. Some people put on their best fit, best outfit, or they probably put on some nice fragrance, try to attract a mate or something if they're going there for that. But and for me in this instance, like I don't think I feel invisible at the mall. Like, I don't think people not notice me. I don't think I'm not noticed at the mall. And racism, though, when you talk about racism being a factor of me being like invisible, it's really hard to speak not for me.
Let me try it another way, out of curiosity, Elijah.
Yes.
You're 24 years old.
Yeah.
Have you ever had any experience with racism?
I have.
Can you share it with us?
Yes. I've been called, N-word, of course.
Set the tone for us. Set the picture here now. You've been called the N-word. Where were
Right.
you? Do you remember?
I was in Virginia. I was driving the Nissan Altima when I had that, and I was a Lyft driver. I still am. I'm still in the system and all that, but I just don't have the car.
Okay.
So, long story short, yeah. So
Was
I was
somebody in
dropping
the car?
some people.
Okay.
No, I was dropping some people off at Wolf Trap, and I was trying to find like a designated area to drop off these people, like these ladies, and they wanted to have a good time. They wanted to have a good evening, and I was feeding off of their vibe, their energy levels, and I was making sure they had a good trip out there and make sure they was safe. I was the driver, I was the pilot, and in the midst of like maintaining good conversation, good vibes, and making sure that they were pleased, with the slight refreshments that I did have, obtainable to them. We got to the destination, and I dropped them off where they felt comfortable, because the only people that I had in my mind to please were my passengers, were my customers, were my guests. I dropped them off, and there was a guy on the outside of my vehicle. He was probably the guy that would point drivers towards where you can drop people off or whatever. I didn't really know. I was just going there and leaving, drop off and leave. I would just say dip, but that's slang or whatever. But yeah, so I did that, and after I dropped off these people, I had my window down, I'm saying bye and everything, have a good time, and then this guy is this N-word like this N-word, something, something, something. And then it registered in my mind that he just said the N-word. And I knew he was like talking to me. I know he was addressing me because he was looking in my direction and he was watching me pull away. And that's just one instance that I remember, like I can like recall right now.
Okay. Well, real quick, because time is moving on, Elijah.
Yeah.
Emotionally, did you feel hurt when you? I'm just trying to get into the mind of a young 24-year-old black man, hearing someone call him the N-word. I'm trying to, as someone who's been around, I'm trying to understand the thinking of young African Americans, be it male or female, when they experience that. Because there are some who just dismiss it. Matter of fact, there are some young people, as you know, even African Americans, who use the word, the N-word. So, briefly, so emotionally, you felt hurt.
I was definitely hurt. I was kind of triggered in a way to perform in a way that I would regret. Regret. Like, it's a thing about with composure, equanimity. It's a thing with that. You have to really keep yourself grounded, discipline, control yourself, I try to tell myself these things because not everyone is the same, difference is something that's out here, like in the world, like different beliefs, different styles, different thoughts, different actions. We're all, we have our similarities and we have our differences, but when I bring it back to that moment, when you're exposed to that type of behavior from somebody, someone totally different from me can react a totally different way. They could have been violent, they could have, been at the mouth, talking back, verbal offense, all that, but me personally, that's something that I try to just brush off my shoulders, let go through my one ear out the other type.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read Proverbs chapter 10, verse 1 again. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. Because what you're simply saying, in my opinion, my translation is, you're talking about how you exercise wisdom when that person used the N-word that could have possibly taken you to a level of you becoming violent. Let me share with a few other things in terms of some information in terms of African American men going to prison. 29% of black male high school dropouts between the ages of 20 and 34 were institutionalized in 2014. 29%. We talked about two numbers you don't want to play. The FBI number and the prison number. Let me give you a brief definition of the inmate prison number. That's an identification number issued to all convicted felons by the State Department of Corrections, and that's the prison number. So while one is in prison, there's a number that you get that specifically belongs to you for life. And it's interesting, when I was doing some research on this, it said that informally, the purpose of this number is to dehumanize someone. And I guess it is also supposed to make those who are outside of prison feel superior to someone who's received a prison number. Now, dehumanize, I just put a little footnote here, it means to deprive one of positive human qualities. A whole lot of negative things can come your way, but not the positive. Real quick, let me talk about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the number that they assign to you. And once again, this is a number that's used to track anybody who has come out of prison. If they want to know where John Doe is at any one time, they have this number. And it's, once again, it's a permanent record. Elijah, you had a chance to speak to a gentleman a few moments before we came on who happened to have spent about 4.5 years in prison. Although it was a brief conversation, Elijah, can you briefly share with our audience what kind of impact did that leave on you?
And that set into my mind that it seems like, as a African American, as a black brother, like who I am, I could be, it seems like I'm one step away, in a sense. Even if it doesn't seem that way, you could just be one step away from, that whole life-changing endeavor, like the whole situation, It could be, elusive to, perception right now. You couldn't, just not comprehend that, as an individual, a black African American male walking around here. You can just not comprehend that right now, but one step away,
Now, being one step away, Elijah, because you're only 24 years old, so you have a bright future. But knowing and feeling that you might be one step away from being incarcerated, which is a life-changing event, how does that impact your look towards the future? Because when you and this is your term, one step away, and the way I translate that, it's as though it means you're very close, and at any moment, in one wrong step, one wrong step, and you're in this life-changing situation. Yet you're 24 and you have a vision for a better life too. Help me out and help the audience out as a young, again, African-American male. What kind of, first of all, does it create any form of depression? What does it do to your mental health, etc.?
I'm challenged in a number of ways. I'm oppressed in a number of ways.
I'm sorry, did you say
oppressed?
Oppressed, okay.
And, depression will come because, I'm thinking I'm having all of this inundation, this overwhelming sensation of just like, oh, you're perceived this way by this type of figure, and apparently there's this power like above me that can sentence me to a number of life-altering things that's not really for the better of me individually. Even if I'm innocent or guilty, what they say is word, and it's like me being that one step away is like, it's alarming, but can't really let that get to me, like get to my mental as much. I have to keep in mind what I want to do in life, and not only my priorities, but my interests, and if those interests are, benevolent or not, So, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned one step away, and that could be because of what's going on in our society, especially in terms of racism. But this gentleman also mentioned something else that I thought was pretty critical for us to share with our audience, especially young people. Because this is what I call self-induced incarceration. You put yourself in a position to get locked up. And he mentioned the word, because I asked him, what got him in prison from the very beginning? And do you remember what he said? The G word.
Greed.
Greed. He talked about greed. Here was someone who, he said he felt like a king, I believe.
How much is enough? That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Like, he said greed. How much of this power is enough? How much of this control is enough? When will it ever be enough? These are just questions that are just like influence thought, It's really intense. It's really intense.
Let me ask you, I want to go back to, you talked about how growing up in a certain environment, you mentioned the projects, and I grew up in the projects. And one of the things I remember from the project is not having enough food, roaches in the apartment, mice.
I
I,
combat those.
I remember that. I'm sorry.
No, I combat those. Like I've had like pest problems, but then I do my research and then work.
And that's great because I know your dad does that too. But also in that environment, I remember across the street from us, somebody actually killed somebody with an axe. But my point is, with the environment not having much, and even this gentleman talked about he grew up in Southeast, but he made something of himself. Do you think going without in your earlier years for so long, not having a lot of food, not having clothes, not having cars, from your perspective as a young African American male, does that create a mentality of greed? Does that create a mentality, even with, I'm just talking out loud here, with people robbing banks and robbing other people? Ultimately, it's to get money to purchase possessions for the most part.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? And how do you plan to keep Elijah from falling victim to the consequences of misplacing your position on greed?
Oh, well, to slow down and to back up. So you're talking about the environment. They do what they think will make these ends meet. They do what they perceive in their mind, what they conceptualize will cause and effect. They'll be like, okay, so if I obtain this money, or if I steal from this lady, then she will have what I need, and then I will be able to do what I wish afterwards. But there are consequences, and they probably don't really realize that at the moment, quite oblivious to it in the moment, because they're so infatuated on the fact that they could get what they feel that they desire, like this urge, like this eagerness to obtain this value that will benefit them, and they can be blinded by the effects of reality. They don't know who this person or what this person knows that they're trying to get something from, but also their environment. Like, maybe they don't have too much to fall back on, so they're ready to risk their life, or just risk anything for that matter, just to obtain something more, something better than what they currently have.
Supposedly better.
Right.
You hit another buzzword, a key word for me: consequences. The gentleman that we spoke to, he mentioned something that many people in the audience should really think about when you go to prison. He talked about rape. And this is where black men are being raped. And he emphasized to us that that's real. And so sometimes this person want to rob somebody to get that nice car, but they're not thinking about the consequences if they find themselves in prison and they're being raped with no control. But as a young African American male, Elijah, when you heard him with such emphasis talking about rape, individuals being raped in prison, can you share with me what you felt and what you thought?
I thought about how those dudes in prison just want to, feel some type of pleasure. Like, I think about how, I don't know what their sexual preference is, like if they're into strictly into dudes or into like some girls, but they wanted to assert their dominance upon an individual to satisfy their desires or like the pleasure they wanted to feel. So I'm just like, if a man thinks they have a thought on a certain idea, and if he wants to really have that play out, then I think by all means they'll have that happen. They'll have that play out. So if they physically and mentally feel like they can cause such an action, for their benefit, they'll do it, and disregarding however this victim may feel. So,
Well, interesting response. Here's the question I have for you. If one knows that if they go to prison and he's going to be raped by other men, should not that be a deterrent? I mean, how many people do you think, if they were fully aware of those consequences, would want to accept that kind of invitation?
ignorance plays a factor, because I'm gonna repeat that. Ignorance plays a factor because the person outside of prison, the person that's never experienced such an environment, may think that, oh, I can, overcome that. Like, there will be no one to, like, take that manhood away from me, or just assert themselves to a point and just do that to me. They're probably thinking that, and me, I think that as well. But I'm just like, it seems like anything could happen, once you're like behind those bars or just in that environment. Like, I've never actually been, like, personally, but no telling, like, who's bigger than me, Like, I know there's people out there bigger than me.
Well, and let me say this too, though, Elijah. I mean, it's just not the big guys who can rape people. I mean, there's some little tough guys in prison as well, so it's not the size. But you bring up an interesting point, which is why I'm so happy to have you on the program, even though this was a schedule adjustment, because again, you hit a key word in my mind. You said ignorance has something to do with it. That's why this show and getting feedback from individuals like yourself is important, because information is the best way to correct a certain degree of ignorance. That's why I wanted to emphasize, and that's why I was so happy that the young man who spent 4.5 years in prison made it very clear that rape in prison is real. He also talked about something that we both witnessed, because we were in a small room, and you remember what his comments were about that small room. I'll let you share with our audience.
He didn't really like to be enclosed in a small room, enclosed in that type of environment. And I'm pretty sure that brings back some moments for him, moments where he just did not want to be in his life at the moment. But I'm sure he, made the best of it. He had to, because that was his will. That was his, he was determined to do so, And once you experience something like traumatic like that, it sticks with you. It sticks with you. I believe that. You can try to, like, flush it out, as much as you want, but when you think back, it's somewhere in your mind that you've experienced that thing. So
what's the best solution in that regard?
Solution
to not experience that, because I also talked to the gentleman about prevention. I mean, first of all, not going there in the first place.
Right.
I mean, we're all human. We can all make mistakes. And I even asked him, how did it all start for him? I mean, it goes back to that roadmap.
Right.
And his roadmap was kind of interesting, because he was from an impoverished neighborhood, if you will. Didn't have much.
I'll say mindfulness, You really have to be mindful of what you're doing, what you're, spending time on, what you're devoting energy towards. And sometimes you may feel like, oh, I know this is bad, but what else can I do? Like, that hurts me, like, honestly, knowing that that's probably the thought process that some people have, going on, like, trying to make ends meet, like selling, illegal substances, or, those things on the black market or whatever like that. Like, it's really intense.
Yeah, let me go back to something else he said too. Elijah, and I want to bring this point up because I know your mother and I know your father, and I know both of them are Christians. And he said, the gentleman who had been in prison 4.5 years, he said that he tried, his mom and dad had raised him right. He did say his mom passed away when he was 10. But it was fascinating. I don't know if you picked up on this, but I asked him, I said, well, what about your father? When you went to prison, did you hurt your father? Now, he had a very interesting response. I don't know if you remember. But he said that when he shared it with his father that he was going to prison, you remember what he said?
The first time ever in his life, his father said those 3 heartwarming words.
Okay, say it a little louder. Now, I want to make sure our audience can hear this because this is important. I'm going to make another point on it.
The first time in his life, he's heard from his father's mouth, through his teeth, off of his tongue, that he loved him. You know, his father told him, "I love you." It's
and maybe
impactful.
because I'm sorry.
It's impactful. Like it's.
Yeah, maybe because I'm a senior, but I found that fascinating. Let me ask you, Elijah, if you had to guess, with the almost 500,000 African American men in prison,
Mm-hmm.
how many of them do you think may have been told that they are loved, that someone loved them? Just a best guess. And we can do it.
Roughly, well, I want to say half.
Okay, well, I was thinking 50% too.
Yeah, that's what I hope for, you know. But in reality,
Good
it could
point,
be,
too.
you know, less than half, because I know that love is barely like exerted as much out here in the world. Like it seems that way. It's not really promoted as much, but.
And I'm sorry now. I want to make sure I heard you correctly. I thought I heard you say love is not promoted as much.
Yeah, it's not really exerted as much. I think, you know.
Now, when you say promoted by as much, are you talking about by family? Are you talking about who's not promoting love as much?
Like when I say love, like I'm thinking about like in its most genuine form, you know. I'm thinking about like like genuine love. I'm not talking about some, oh, I love you, but you know, something, whatever. But
What's genuine love, though, Elijah? Help. So it's clear to our audience. How are you defining genuine love?
where you can like back it up, you know, not only with, you know, words, but with action, you know. Actions speak louder than words, you know. I feel like a lot of people have heard that statement before, but I'm also just like, if someone's really saying they care about you, and when they're able to, you know, they devote time like towards like, you know, getting something that you would want, or like tending to, you know, hearing you out and listen to your problems or whatever mental struggles you're having, you know, like being of service to you in a way, and more, you know. They're being genuine with their actions. There's nothing malevolent or malicious. There's no like hidden agenda that they're trying to like undermine you, or just use this information that they're being so vulnerable enough to express to you. Like they're not trying to use it against you, you know. Being genuine in various aspects, and all those aspects will equate to, you know, love. So.
And if you're receiving that, Elijah, if one is receiving that, what do they give in return?
The treatment that they feel they can at the moment, I'll say. Like, not it doesn't even have to be, you know, something physical, you know. It can be something thoughtful. Like, when I say physical, I need to really elaborate on that.
And let me try my question, because maybe I wasn't as clear as I should be.
Yeah.
If someone is sharing with you, and sharing with men, young men, African American men in particular, love,
Yeah.
what's the payback or the pay it forward from the recipient? And let me share with you what comes to my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say today my mother's been gone for a long time, but because she struggled to raise me and my 3 brothers, I tried to stay out of trouble. And I'm so grateful that I have not had the experience at this age of going to prison, because that was my payback to my mother. And so I was wondering, for example, when drive-by shootings, we see a lot of that in certain areas, and we're in the Washington, D.C. area. I want to ask you, just for your opinion, when someone drives down the street and shoots another person, just so randomly, in your opinion, is that someone who maybe has been exposed to love, who's been told that they're loved, or possibly none of that? I'm just curious as to what...
It's a possibility, like the love levels that they could have experienced may not have reached that line where it's just like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be, driving around with a firearm or something like that. But also there's other combating forces, I'll say, because, it's a environment. I would say environment, yeah. Like the people that they allow themselves to be around, could be influencing them on a different, level. Like, oh yeah, man, like let's do this. Like this is what we're about to do to make this bread, or this is what we're about to do to, like, just be on the come up.
Are we talking peer pressure here?
Yeah, peer pressure. Yeah, I'm glad, because I'm glad you said that, because I'm trying to get my thoughts together, because it's a huge cluster right now, because a lot is being mentioned. And I want to be able to elaborate on these various, like, topics. I do, but...
And you're doing a great job, because I'm putting a lot in front of you, but we don't see young men, African American men, on the TV screen.
Right.
Unless they maybe some celebrity's son or daughter.
Right.
But the typical young African American male, they don't get a chance to sit in front of a television camera. And this is the opportunity that you're given. So I'm probably pushing a lot your way, but you're doing great, because you're the future. Let me remind the audience that our title is 2 Numbers, FBI in Prison, 2 numbers you don't want to play. Here are a few other reasons why one doesn't want to go to prison. Because we're talking about consequences.
Right.
They talk about how discrimination on the job market is kind of more intense with racial inequality. Now think about it. It's tough enough if you don't have a prison record in your background trying to get a job, because of the current tone of racism in our society. But then you got a prison record behind you and you're trying to get a job. It reminds me, once I was in Malcolm X Park in Washington, D.C., and I wrote a poem that's called Common Sense We All Got a Lot. And I wrote that poem when I saw this young man who was being arrested. But you would have thought he had just hit the lottery, because he was walking like, look at me, I got handcuffs on. So my point is, if you have racism in the job market, you want to keep your record as clean as possible. That's why I'm saying that FBI number and that prison number you don't want. Here's something else too. It says that not only does a criminal record make it harder to get hired, but studies found that a criminal record is more of a handicap for a black man. What this particular statistic is saying and information is saying is, yeah, you might can get a job with a criminal record if you're white. But if you're a black man, it's going to be that much harder. And what they went on to say is that employers are willing to give second chances to criminals. But that's assuming you're white. And let me just say this, and I won't talk a lot about this, but they say that this mass incarceration of young African American men is the new Jim Crow. And Jim Crow, of course, was a way of forcing blacks into segregated positions. I mean, trying to make it harder for us to enjoy life like everybody else should.
Basically.
Now, Elijah, I know I put a lot in front of you, but as you've heard my questions, you heard from the gentleman earlier, in terms of what you've heard today and learned today, what can your friends, I mean, because you're going to be a different person when you walk out this studio.
Because it's a different experience.
Right, different experience, and hopefully there have been a lot of positive things that you picked up. But this could be the very moment when you decide you're going to be the drum major for change. You're going to be the drum major to try to curtail this mass incarceration. Like I told you earlier, you obviously stepped to a different drum beat. Now, we talked earlier about individuals going and maybe robbing people. And sometimes when you rob people, it's all about the money, right?
You know, that's what,
And
people place value on, something that we all have in relation to each other, this money system. So.
But in your opinion, are young people, young African Americans in particular, are they being informed about other ways to create wealth, i.e., investing in stocks?
It's the information is out there thanks to the internet, but it's not really projected in a way where it's like advertised on like a billboard if you're riding down like a highway. It's not completely in your face. It's not there like that. You would have to do some research on your own. And
okay, well, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but you're a young man, and I have to talk to you something I call straight talk.
Right.
And it's out of love, and as the elder and as the senior, I have to ask you certain questions that may not be comfortable. I don't think this is going to be uncomfortable for you, but I wanted to give you a little background before I ask you the question. And this question is very simple.
Yes.
You say you're 24, right? How many stocks do you own? How many stocks in your portfolio, your savings portfolio?
I can make zeros with my hand.
0? How do you feel about that?
I feel like I'm probably under the curve, or I'm just like, haven't really been exposed to that type of environment. I haven't really been taught, about that. I feel like I'm ill-informed, on that level of things. And I feel like if I do want to see myself profit and gain some traction on like being financially stable and being able to obtain a living condition where I'm able to enjoy life at an optimum level, then I would probably need to be informed about something like that. I probably need to be.
Let me ask you this, Elijah, and we're getting a little bit away from the title, but that's all right. What kind of phone do you have?
I have a Droid.
Droid.
It's powered by Android.
Okay, so who's the manufacturer of that?
I would say probably Motorola, Samsung. Probably.
What kind of computer do you have?
I have HP. HP.
Hewlett Packard?
Hmm?
Is it a Hewlett Packard? Who's the manufacturer of your HP? HP, I'm usually thinking of a Hewlett Packard computer.
I'm
Okay.
trying to think, because I have a desktop and I have a laptop, but I'm mainly using the laptop
Okay.
more.
Well,
So
where do you go to eat sometimes? If you know.
I go to some vegan spots.
Some what kind of
Some
spots?
vegan spots.
Vegan spots?
Yeah, to eat sometimes,
Okay. My point in asking you those questions is you don't have ownership in any of those places, right?
Correct.
Do you feel unworthy to own stocks in America? I mean, you can support it by spending your money, but do you feel unworthy to want to be part of the ownership?
I really don't feel unworthy if I'm supporting something that I enjoy. I wouldn't mind.
Now, that's an interesting response. But here's how I have to respond to that.
Uh-oh.
You're enjoying it on a certain level, but at the same time, I think you might be making other people possibly wealthy too, like the folks who own stocks in Motorola.
Mm.
Now, and I use the term unworthy because you are no different than anybody else in terms of the wealth that they're enjoying. You should enjoy it. Now, I got a few shares of stock in Wendy's, and I would always tell my daughter, I said, look, rather than going to McDonald's, you go to Wendy's. But what's more important, as a footnote here, Elijah, just having one share of stock allows you to go to these board meetings. And I'm kind of getting off the topic here, but I didn't want to leave without sharing that with you, and hopefully some young people in the audience will start thinking about investing. Because perhaps if you invest, and we had Reverend Fauntleroy, Reverend Congressman Fauntleroy, he said if you teach individuals how to make income, you don't have to worry about them robbing you. I just got a cue that we have about 4 minutes left, Elijah. And I'd like to just know, what are your thoughts? I mean, we've been sitting here talking, and you talked to the gentleman about prison.
Yeah.
Especially since I want our audience to know you weren't expecting to be in the position that you're in, but I really appreciate it. But what are your thoughts? Because God didn't make no mistakes when He made us. All men and women are created equally. Nobody is superior to the other. But what are your thoughts? And when you respond, can you think about the young brother or young sister who might be watching you? Because I'm assuming, and you would know better than I do because you're a young man and you have friends, but I'm assuming that there are people who have questions. They're looking for answers. They're looking for solutions.
So the main question would be?
We're about to close out the show, and I always like to give my guests the last few minutes to say something that can be positive and help somebody who might be struggling.
Being in the moment, being mindful of the moment, that really could make a difference with how the rest of your day plays out, When you take in your current situation, current environment, you have to think whether it's harming you, whether it's encouraging you, whether it's causing you to act in malevolent ways or causing you to show some love out here in the world. But I just like to say that knowledge is definitely power, but when you don't utilize that power, it will be lost. And also, what you know can contribute towards the creation or destruction of a nation. So
I just got the cue that we're just about out of time. But Elijah, I want to say God bless you, because I know you're a Christian man, and thank you for coming on and accepting this challenge to share with our audience. So we at Africa's Vision Network appreciate you, and God bless you, and we wish you well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we want to thank our audience for tuning in, and we hope something that's been said by Elijah will cause one to think, do you want a prison number? Do you want an FBI number? And think about the consequences of going to prison. The horrible one I'd like to leave with you. Ask yourself, do you want to experience rape? Thank you for watching.
Is because so glad. Ooh.